Welcome, everybody, and welcome back if you've been with us in any of our other virtual BAS 2020 sessions. This is the fourth of our sessions that we have planned and the final session. I'm Mark Millam with Flight Safety Foundation and MC of our virtual BAS webinar. And as I've said before, we wanted to be together under one roof in Savannah today, but given the circumstances, we're glad to get together in any way we can. We're grateful for the number of people that have already participated in all the other sessions that we've done, and it looks like we're on pace to have a very good crowd today. Thanks for being with us as we've looked at many different presenters, and today we'll look at some of the safety challenges that we'll continue to work with long after the crisis. I'll give you a little more advice a little bit later on what you need to know to engage in our event with speakers and moderators. But to get us started, once again, I'd like to introduce Flight Safety Foundation's President and CEO, Dr. Hassan Shahidi.
Well, thank you, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. Greetings and welcome to Virtual BAS 2020, session number 4. Those that participated in day 1 and this morning, welcome back. Glad to have you back. As Mark mentioned, we had a significant turnout and participants yesterday and this morning. All very engaging sessions with great speakers, and we have a great session planned this afternoon. And thank you so much for the great feedback that we have been receiving. Please keep them coming. I mentioned this during the past couple of days, but BAS is organized in partnership with NBAA and has been continuously held since 1955. And as I mentioned before, we didn't want to make history by just completely canceling this year's event. And so, with the great help of the Business Advisory Committee, we have transformed it to a virtual event as you have seen it. The safety work must continue, and we hope that you find it useful, and we look forward to your feedback. So with that, I'll just turn it back over to Mark.
Yes. So as I've done before, I got a few short instructions, and many of you may have already had a lot of experience with this already. But as we go through this session, we want you to share your thoughts, questions, and comments using the question box on your control panel. When we get to that part of the session, we'll use some of these questions as we ask for responses from our speakers. We'll monitor the chat activity as well out of the control panel and reply as we're able to help you out if you're having technical problems. There's always a chance you're not the only one with the problem, so please let us know if that's happening. And when we conduct polls, we'll use this special link that's on the screen that allows you to participate through a separate mobile device or a separate browser window. And instant results will be displayed on your webinar screen. So as always, in the other BAS sessions, let's start off with just a few examples so you get used to this. We're going to scatter the polls a little bit more today, so we'll be coming back to them. So just have your device or your browser window ready, and then you can jump in when it's time for those polls. We'd like to find out through this first poll whether or not this is your first session out of BAS 2020, or have you been involved in some of the other sessions? So let us know what the overlap is, and that gives us a sense of how familiar our audience is with these BAS sessions. And it looks like a great share of you have been with us all along, so we thank you very much for tuning in for all of those sessions.
And sorry, audience, for some of the repetitions in our remarks, but we wanted to make sure if somebody was joining in for the first time that they had the instructions. So thank you for your patience.
Okay, I'll lock this poll. We'll move to one that's specific to one of our speakers today. We'd like to know how much time during a typical flight do you think is spent with the autopilot turned off? And I'm just waiting to have that stabilize a little bit. And as we get the final results here, I will walk this, and we'll keep that in mind as we hear from one of our speakers today. Okay. Well, good. Let's get on with some discussions about safety. And I'd like to welcome back with us our chair of the Business Advisory Committee, Lisa Sassy. Lisa?
Thank you, and welcome back, everyone. So I was extremely encouraged this morning as we ran the earlier poll about what your interest was, and excited to say that runway excursions was considered #1. Maybe a little premature in stating that the foundation is working currently on a project for runway excursions. And of course, all of the work that the foundation does then becomes a toolkit. So I was really pleased to see that. We've got a lot planned, so I'm not going to take any further time. Dr. Shahidi, Mark, thank you very much. I'd like to introduce our next speaker and moderator, also a business advisory member, Tom Huff. So Tom is a retired Navy captain and is currently the Aviation Safety Officer for Gulfstream, based in Savannah, Georgia, where we all would like to be at the moment. He facilitated the implementation of SMS in flight test, flight operations, and engineering, following the loss of the test airplane and crew in 2011. Among them, a former Navy squadron mate of Tom's. He chairs both the Flight Test Safety Committee, the NBAA Safety Committee, and he is a passionate safety advocate and is also a proud member of the Flight Safety Foundation. Tom, welcome.
Thanks, Lisa. And I guess it's only appropriate that you have someone broadcasting live from Savannah, since we all can't be here. I can tell you that we were very disappointed not being able to host this year, but look forward to hitting the fast forward button on COVID-19 and hosting BAST in the Coastal Empire in 2021. Well, speaking of the future, we're pleased to have the most respected name in aviation technology, Dr. Kathy Abbott, the FAA's Chief Scientific and Technical Advisor for Flight Deck Human Factors, with us. Dr. Abbott has 4 decades of specialization in aviation human factors. She is central in the human engineering domain during regulatory and policy development for all facets of our aviation system, including flight guidance systems, avionics, data communications, instrument procedure design, electronic flight bags, electronic displays, to name just a few. She is definitely cut from the safety cloth, providing her expertise in accident, incident, and other safety data analyses over her successful and impactful career. Prior to joining the FAA, Kathy led analytical, simulation, and flight studies at NASA to boost aviation safety and operational efficiency for all aviation segments. She has both a master's and a PhD in computer science and a bachelor's in math and information science. Her awards and recognition are numerous, to include Engineer of the Year from American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, an Aerospace Laurel from Aviation Week and Space Technology, and both the Exceptional Service and Outstanding Leadership Medals from NASA. With that, let me thank Dr. Abbott for joining us today to give us her thoughts on aviation technology and what the future holds for capabilities as well as challenges. Dr. Abbott?
Thank you for that very nice introduction, Tom. I really appreciate it. And thank you to Lisa and Hassan and Mark for having me participate in this. I was very disappointed when it had to be canceled for an in-person meeting, but I'm very happy that we can participate as with each other, at least virtually. When I was first asked about talking at this meeting, the subject that was first brought up was flight deck automation. But one of the things I'd like to share with you is that we are looking at flight deck automation in the context of flight path management, because our thinking is that the purpose of the pilot's job is not to manage the automated systems. The automated systems are tools for the pilot to use to fly the airplane. And flight path management has to do with how the pilot flies the airplane. So next slide, please. If there's anything that I think we can all agree on is that aviation is very much about change. And we've got a lot of new technologies and operations, not even considering the current crisis, but we are seeing a lot of new entrants into the airspace system. We are seeing new technologies that are being leveraged to improve safety and efficiency. We have lots of opportunities that are out there, but it does represent change. Next slide, please. So, what are some of the ways that things are changing? We are seeing new ways to do communications, navigation, and surveillance. Next, please. And that means things are changing for the pilot. And some of the ways that we're seeing them change is that sometimes things are simpler and sometimes they're more complex. And we could have a whole presentation on that subject in general. There's more information available to the pilot to do the job, and I'll talk more about that later. There are more tasks that have to be managed. So the pilots have to manage their tasks, and including the additional ones, and I'll reference a few of those later. We're seeing different kinds of errors being made by the pilots. Some examples have to do with, one example was when we were having a problem with oceanic datacom, the pilots were getting clearances that were showing up with a lag of 24 hours. And they thought the clearance was for them, so they were following the clearance. So that was an interesting situation. We're also seeing more use of automated systems. And that is something that we want to leverage the benefits of that, but we also have to be aware of some of the risks that come along with that. Next slide, please. The topic of flight path management has been one that we've been very interested in for quite a while now, and we are working very hard to figure out how to give guidance from an FAA perspective on what to do for flight path management. And this definition is one that we have agreed with the Flight Path Management Working Group under the Air Carrier Training Aviation Rulemaking Committee. And I'll mention a little bit more about that group later because they're doing quite a bit of work to recommend guidance in a variety of areas related to flight path management. But you can see the definition here. This is our working definition. Flight path management is planning, execution, and assurance of the guidance and control of aircraft trajectory and energy in flight and on the ground. So that's the, like I said, that's the working definition. Now, what does that mean as far as the topics we're considering? Next, please. We are planning to put together a new advisory circular to give guidance for flight path management. And these are the topics that we're considering. And we're planning to put many of them in there. Manual flight operations is certainly one important one, and I'm going to expand on that in just a few minutes. One of the reasons I'm going to expand on it is because some of our data analysis has shown that for flight path management related accidents worldwide from 2009 through 2016, 92% of those accidents had a manual flight operations error of some kind involved that either contributed or was causal in the accident. That's quite a bit and definitely deserves our attention. Next subject is managing automated systems. I'm sorry, it was just the next bullet, not the next slide, if you don't mind going back.
Sorry, too quick on that.
Thank you for being responsive. I'll try and keep up with you. So managing automated systems, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Pilot monitoring for flight path management is a very, very important one. And those first three are the ones that I'm going to emphasize in the rest of the presentation. But I do want to mention information management, because I will mention that later, energy management, operating in the airspace, operational policy for flight path management, and we're considering stabilized approach and go around decision and implementation. There's been quite a bit of work that's been done in the last few years, including through the Flight Safety Foundation on some of these topics, and we always want to leverage the resources that are available. Next, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, manual flight operations. People tend to think of stick and rudder when they think manual flight operations, but it's actually more than that, because it also involves some of the mental or cognitive skills that are really needed to fly what we are calling manual flight operations. And we want to look at the whole breadth of that, the different aspects of it. If you'll go to the next slide, please. One of the reasons that we have a concern about this, and I want to especially highlight this for the current situation, is the concern about skill degradation. There's been a lot of discussion that use of automated systems is degrading pilots' manual flying skills. And the issue is not that automation is causing it directly, it's because of lack of practice. When the pilots don't have practice doing the manual flight maneuvers, their skills can degrade, both the motor skills and the cognitive skills. And one of the things that we know about human performance is that motor skills begin to degrade after very short periods of time with non-use. So in the current situation, if pilots are not getting the opportunity to practice these skills, then those skills can degrade. And that is something that we're going to have to address. It was something that we were concerned about anyway, but in the current circumstances, I would definitely want to highlight it as a potential risk area that does deserve attention as we get back into flight operations. Another important point about motor skills is that when you do get back to practicing them, those skills can come back pretty quickly. Cognitive skills, on the other hand, can deteriorate faster than the motor skills. And when I say cognitive skills, I'm thinking about things like doing visual approaches, the spatial reasoning that's involved in doing something like that. So it's the mental part of the manual operations that pilots need to have and need to be practicing as well. And we know that in general, cognitive skills deteriorate more quickly than motor skills. So an example you could think of is if you speak another language, a second language or third language, and you don't practice it, then it can leave your mind. It's easier to forget, and it's more difficult to reestablish than the motor skills. So that's something to be aware of when you're thinking about manual flight operations. We have a research project that's looking at a lot more depth into these issues related to manual flight operations, and I'll look forward to sharing that information at another time. So if you go to the next slide, please. Some of the contributors to skill degradation, i.e. lack of practice, is the directed use of automated systems. One of the reasons for the poll was to see how much time that people actually spend off the autopilot. You need the practice in order to maintain the proficiency or to develop it in the first place, because one of the issues we have also seen in the past is that in some cases, pilots with low experience have a difficult time developing these manual flight operations knowledge and skills. And then maintaining proficiency is another question altogether. Some of the reasons, the directed use of it for a variety of sources. Sometimes the manufacturers recommend maximum amount of the use of automated systems. Sometimes it's the policy of the operator. Sometimes it's other policies. In the US, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in just a minute, we have advocated allowing pilots to practice manual flight operations during normal line operations because we think it's really important to get that. There's some discussion about how much can you get in training, but the FAA's position is that yes, we need to have the training, but we also need to have line operational experience to maintain that proficiency. So next slide, please. I mentioned the Air Carrier Training Aviation Rulemaking Committee, the ACT-ARC. This is a committee that has several subgroups that are working on a variety of topics related to 121, 135 operations, and 142 training centers. The general objectives are to recommend guidance to the FAA in areas where we ask for help. And one of the groups that has been working since 2014 to give us some help in this area is the Flight Path Management Working Group that we have tasked with giving us recommended information in all the areas related to flight path management. So this is the charter of the group. Their products are available online. They do more than just the Flight Path Management Working Group, but that's the only one I'll speak about today. You can find it online on the FAA website. The recommendations are publicly available. If you do a search, it's actually pretty easy to find. Next slide, please. As a result of some of the work that we asked the Flight Path Management Group to do in manual flight operations, we published a SAFO, a Safety Alert for Operators, SAFO 17007, on manual flight operations proficiency. And in it, we recommended topics for training and maneuvers to be considered as part of training. So if you go to the next slide, it gives you a little bit more information about that. Manual flight operations, foundational knowledge and skills in the following areas. So all of those are part of what was recommended and we included in the SAFO as guidance to the industry. Won't go through those in detail, but you can see the kinds of things that need to be there. Next slide, please. Some of the potential training scenarios are looking at combinations of use of the different automated systems and circumstances where we have seen that pilots sometimes have difficulty. So this list of potential training scenarios are ones that we are encouraging operators to include as part of their training because we think it's important in order to maintain manual flight operations proficiency. Next slide, please. For automated systems, which is the next topic that we would look to include in an advisory circular, we recognize that automated systems have contributed significantly to safety and efficiency and effectiveness of the operations. In order for those automated systems to be effective, there needs to be appropriate integration of the pilots with the automated systems. They have to be designed that way, they have to work that way, they have to be trained that way. And our view of automated systems has matured over the years as we've gotten more experience. And I'd like to share with you some of those lessons. So next, please. The old view is we tend to talk about automation, but one of the reasons I want to highlight this point to you is because we actually have more than one system on the aircraft that is automated, and they can be very different from each other. I'm not just talking about autopilot, auto throttle, flight management systems, and so on, but there's others, alerting systems, fuel management systems. There's automation of different kinds of information processing that the pilots are working with now. Very useful, but it's important to recognize these are very distinct systems. It's not a single system. So we would be more precise if we would talk about automated systems instead of automation as though it's a single item. Next slide, please. The old view was to give the human operator what he or she does best and give the automation what it does best. But our experience in implementing these systems has led us to realize that we really need to have better integration of the two, because it's not just a matter of handing it off. And that'll become clear in just a moment in one of the next lessons. So next, please. I already mentioned this. There was some discussion that automation causes degradation of basic flying skills. In fact, that's not really accurate. It's lack of practice that causes degradation of basic skills. And our thinking is that yes, you can have these automated systems and still maintain those skills as long as you have the appropriate practice, training and practice. Next, please. There's a view, at least there used to be, that more automation can reduce training. Well, what we have found in our experience with this is that more automation can increase training, because now you not only have to train the system, the use of the system, the automated system, and how to operate it, the pilot now has to monitor it and still has to be able to revert, at least in some cases, if the automated system stops working or has a failure of some kind or sensor failure. So it can actually increase the training and does lead to the pilot needing to monitor. Next slide, please. More automation reduces risk. That was the view that has been there. One of the things that we've come to realize is that more automation introduces different risks. And we have a whole set of data related to that we can share. If you have questions, please feel free to contact me. And please go to the next one, because I'm going to move to flight path monitoring. This has been a very hot topic. And one of the things we've recognized in accidents is that there are times when monitoring isn't done properly by the pilots. So this has been an area of focus for at least some operators to better improve the monitoring that the pilots are doing. There are some barriers that we have found to effective monitoring, and some of the examples are listed here. In the current situation, and as we get back to more normal situations for our operations, stress and fatigue have a definite effect on human performance. So we need to be aware of all this. I'd also like to mention that the Flight Safety Foundation does have a document on effective flight path monitoring, and that's a resource that I would certainly encourage people to be aware of and to use. The FAA is funding research with NASA on improved training for effective monitoring, so we're trying to take it the next step. And by the way, just telling pilots to pay better attention doesn't work. Next slide, please. Now, flight deck information. Things have changed a lot. For those of you who may not recognize this flight deck, this is a DC-10. And part of the research work that we did back when I was at NASA doing research, as Tom mentioned, so this was quite a long time ago, was looking at the information available to the pilots in the DC-10. And you can see there's lots of the gauges and dials and dedicated instruments that provided a lot of specific individual pieces of information to the flight crew. If you go to the next slide, please. Well, this is the MD-11. So basically same fuselage aircraft, but very, very different flight deck. And as part of the analysis that we were doing back at NASA, just doing a simple count of the number of pieces of information available to the pilot, we found that in this flight deck, there were more than twice as many pieces of information, just a simple number, just a simple count, more than twice as much information available to the pilot, but a very, very different way of presenting the information, much more integrated and so on, but definitely changes the way the pilot gets to the information. And the next slide, please. And of course, this is a very modern one, and things are continuing to change. As new technology is introduced and we leverage that technology, again, it changes how the pilot accesses, uses, and exploits that information in the flight deck. And we have to recognize that and help support that with training. So that's why there's a section we're planning in the new AC on flight deck information management. Next slide, please. I'd like to wrap up the content of the topics of flight path management with a reminder that we do rely on pilots and controllers to mitigate risk, which they do on a regular and ongoing basis. And they do that extremely well much of the time, in fact, almost all the time. We just don't hear about it because it's what we expect. I've got examples shown here of some of the more noticeable examples, but it happens all day, every day. We look to pilots to safely deal with operational variability, to deal with all the situations that they encounter. And like I said, it's done very well, and we need to make sure that we support those tasks that they do so well all day, every day. Next slide, please. So some concluding thoughts for the pilots: know your systems, not just how to push the buttons, but how they operate and how they affect the flight path of the airplane. We are looking at flight path management as a key aspect of prevention of things like loss of control, potentially runway excursions as well. So we see this as a critical core capability that we need the pilots to have. So we need to support them doing that. It is key. In some of the areas we need to help them and develop and maintain the knowledge and skills: manual flight operations, managing automated systems, monitoring flight path, and the other topics that I mentioned. And with that, I'll conclude and open to questions.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Can we have Tom back?
Thanks, Kathy. Great presentation. I really was captivated by the emphasis on how we define the terms as it relates to automation. I think you're spot on. We have to stop blaming automation, quote unquote, but how we interface with the automation. And I kind of like the old versus the new perspective. And I think that's important as we look through that lens to figure out how we're going to address this problem, if you want to call it a problem or a challenge or an opportunity for that matter. But,
all of the above.
Yeah, I think so. Hey, Mark, I really wanted to allow the audience to have the opportunity to ask a question of Kathy, if we could. If you've got one in queue, go ahead. If not, then I've got my list as well.
Yeah, why don't we start with, would you consider adding CRM to your list of topics for flight path management?
CRM is critical for successful flight path management. One of the reasons that I didn't list it there was because it's part of every single topic that's there. And from an FAA perspective, we have a separate advisory circular that we have already and are in the process of updating. Hopefully we will be able to provide that connection on how the two topics interact with each other. But your observation is right on the mark. It's critical to successful flight path management for the pilots.
Kathy, if I could ask, it's my observation as well as others that the 6158 dance card for initials and recurrence is quite full. So as systems are getting more complicated and our interaction with them makes them therefore more complex, do you have any thoughts on how this might go in terms of, do we need to expand the duration of the training? I would expect that the ACT is probably looking at this very closely on how we want to accommodate stuffing more things into the training in the simulator, which is really where we get the most bang for the buck. And I do realize that you made good mention of doing line operation training, and I think that's critical as well.
Well, on the last point, line operations, doing manual flight operations during line operations, we think is a critical piece of it, because I think it's just too challenging and you don't get the real world exposure in the simulator as much. So even if you expand the simulator, which would be a good thing to do, and certainly the FAA is not going to get in anybody's way if they want to expand their training, there's still the real world that we think is important for the pilots to experience to get that proficiency with all the realistic conditions. So training is important. Back to your basic question, if you go back and look at there's a report that the FAA published in 2013 from the Flight Deck Automation Working Group that looked at operational use of flight path management systems, did a lot of data analysis. And one of the things that report highlighted was that we have increased the things that we expect pilots to be able to do and the knowledge and skills that they need to have in general. So should training be expanded to address that? Obviously, we want to have training be as efficient as it can, but yeah, I think we should seriously consider it. I'm not trying to say that we would require that, but I think as a community, it would be worth having that discussion.
Excellent. Mark, back to you if you got another question available.
Yes, we do. We've got plenty. Kathy, what are your thoughts about the fact that the very structure and nature of computer-based and simulator training condition pilots to use automation throughout the various phases of flight? This same behavior is then carried forward into and reinforced in line flight operations.
You've highlighted one of the reasons that we have started the project that I mentioned earlier to look at manual flight operations. We have had the folks doing the work go out and collect current practices, good practices in training, in data analysis, in line operations to see what are some good techniques for doing that, because we recognize that very issue. We recognize that a lot of the training, in fact, sometimes focuses on how to operate the systems, what the pilots sometimes call buttonology, rather than how the systems work and how it affects the flight path. So we're concerned about that. That's one of the reasons that we want to do this new AC. And some of the topics that are in that AC, we don't have very much guidance on. So this is an opportunity to expand that. But I would also point out that the recommendations from the Flight Path Management Working Group are available publicly, and no operator needs to wait for us to publish an AC before they can leverage the information that's available there.
Kathy, is there also some guidance on the periodicity of some of these tasks?
We hope that there will be. That's one of the things we're working on.
Great,
depends on the maneuver.
Mark?
Yeah. Another question says, is there a timeline for the new AC, that they're keenly aware of the work that's been going on this for many years? Hopefully, there's some specific best practices available soon to promote.
We're looking to getting some things out for review, hopefully next calendar year. That's if not before.
Okay, thanks. Another one, since HUD is the most direct source of flight path information, why is there such a resistance in widespread HUD in civil versus military aircraft?
Good question. I'm not sure I know all the reasons for that. Some of it is what people are used to and how they came up. That's part of it. I think there's also the consideration that HUD's not the answer to flight path management. It's part of the solution, part of the answer. It's a tool, a very valuable tool. One of many that we have out there. As the technology continues to improve and we see lots of opportunities out there, maybe you'll see more.
I think somebody that asked that question knew that I was a former Navy guy and I'm a HUD cripple. So. Hey, Mark, I'm showing that we're at time. So with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Abbott so much for taking time out of her busy schedule to join us today. Very insightful presentation, Kathy, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I think it's very important.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, let's move on, Tom.
All right, Mark, I'm calling up some information here on our next segment. We're going to talk about data collection and sharing and how vitally important this is to your safety management system program, specifically your safety assurance pillar. I think I've assembled pretty much an A-team in this regard to talk to us this afternoon. And I asked our NBAA Safety Committee Secretary, newly minted, by the way, Lauren Hanna, to kind of be the primary moderator, and I'll co-moderate with her. Frankly, she's been a rock star on the committee, leading our communications and events team, really amplifying the prominence of safety, specifically at NBAA events. She has a real passion for aviation safety and is a zealot for data collection, analysis, and trending to make business aviation safer. Lauren agreed to co-moderate the segment, so I'll be turning it over to her momentarily. Joining her on this panel will be Jeff Middleman. I consider Jeff a friend and a colleague. He is currently an aviation consultant and founder of Middleman Aviation Solutions. Jeff specializes in data collection and sharing and was formerly with the MITRE Corporation for 39 years, leading advanced aviation system development activity. Jeff was responsible for folding in corporate and general aviation into the Aviation Safety Information Analysis and Sharing Program, also known as ASIAS. An unprecedented success in my view, and we'll do an honorable mention later in the segment. Also joining us is Ben Ivey. He's a senior product manager at GE Aviation, responsible for their flight analytics software and services portfolio. Ben has been dedicated to enhancing aviation safety performance for over 15 years, to include previous employment at Corridor Aviation Services Software. Ben doesn't just immerse himself in aviation data analytics, he's also passionate about flying and is a recreational pilot. Finally, Chad Brewer is an operational safety analyst with the FAA Office of Accident Investigation and Prevention. He's deeply involved in the Commercial Aviation Safety Team and the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee. Chad serves as an industry tri-chair, leading the General Aviation Issues Analysis Team within the ASIAS program. He was also prominent in developing the analytics to support the highly successful Air Traffic Safety Action Program, or ATSAP. I'll remind our panelists to go ahead and make sure that they're unmuted at this time. And Lauren, it's over to you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, Tom. I didn't know you liked me so much. I feel special. So one of the things we really want to cover today, Tom always says on the NBAA Safety Committee, how do we reach the unreachable? I always say, who drank the safety Kool-Aid? So you can tell our personality differences right there. But one of the things, if you're on this, if you're logged in, if you're attending conferences, like we know you drank the Kool-Aid, you've been reached. So what we're really trying to do is learn from all of you. Take back what you learned, go out and reach those people that haven't been reached, and then teach us how to do it too. You're the ones on the front lines talking to people, and we really want to see what's going on. So one of the first things we're going to do is a polling question. If you wouldn't mind bringing up the poll, and it's going to be, do you participate in any of these programs? So we can kind of see, what you're doing.
Lauren, can I do that while you share your webcam?
Oh, sure. There we go.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, here's the poll.
Nice.
I think they're thinking. Maybe they're pulling their phones back out of their pocket. Let's give them a little bit of time.
I think I was so shocked by Tom's awesome introduction that I forgot to turn my webcam on. Sorry about that.
Just a few more seconds. Most people are very familiar with FOQA and ASAP, and it drops off pretty quickly after that.
That's really interesting.
All right.
I did not see that flavor being the top of the Kool-Aid, so that's actually really exciting. But the good thing is we have a whole expert of panels that we're going to get to. The first one I want to speak to is Jeff Middleman. Jeff started a project on the NBAA Safety Committee that is called the Virtual Flight Department. And I'm excited to hear him talk a little bit more about it. So Jeff.
Okay, so thank you, Lauren. As Lauren said, the NBAA Safety Committee has started a project called the Virtual Flight Department. And the goal is to have a free go-to resource for the business community to discover the what, why, and how related to safety best practices to enable the business community to improve their safety stance. So looking at that survey there, it looks like a lot of people, a fair number of people are doing FOQA, but there's not a lot in the other areas there. And as Lauren mentioned, the reachables are here, but the unreachables aren't. So we're trying to come up with a way to better get this information out to the community to improve their safety stance. So the initial focus will be on safety culture, SMS and risk management, data collection and sharing. And later we'll be adding other topics with the safety committee. Today, we're going to be talking about data collection and sharing. But note that all three of these areas are interrelated. So we'll be touching on that as well in a bit. So why is NBA embarking on this project? Well, look at the Part 121 community. They've been very successful employing safety best practices in their operations, leading to the best safety record in aviation. However, we believe only a small percentage of the business community is following these same practices. And that's what we're trying to outreach to. So in this panel, we'll be presenting more information on this project. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm so excited to watch that project grow. It'll be a great source of information. So Ben, one of the key data collection activities is FOQA FDM. I've also heard, I'm going to put you on the spot, that you're going to give some updates from last year's presentation of risk of runway overrun, and also the control check studies. So to see that FOQA in action. So if you could just explain first what FOQA FDM is to the non-reachers, and then tell us all about that other stuff too.
Yeah, so FOQA or FDM, and we use those terms pretty much interchangeably at this point, is the basic process of collecting routinely recorded flight data from the aircraft, what would go to the flight data recorder, the so-called black box recorder of the aircraft. And rather than looking at that data after an accident or an incident has happened, we look at that for every single flight that's flown. And what that lets us do is tease out trends and areas of risk that a particular operator might have, or as we'll show in a second, risks that the entire business aviation community has, and how those are changing in response to reports that have come out or events that have happened related to safety. So it requires having the ability to get data from your aircraft, getting it processed through a program, and then just working with your pilots and your flight department to understand what are we doing and what could we improve on, because it really lets you, understand it at a detailed level exactly what's happening in the air behind the controls.
If we could bring up those slides, that'd be great. The next slide, please.
So if anyone was at BASS last year in Denver, we and my colleague Shelby Below, who can't be with us today, unfortunately, did a study of risk of runway overrun, which is a key safety concern in the industry. And the upshot of his, if I could condense this 45-minute presentation to 20 seconds, was that there's a general trend of landing distances increasing. And when people land on 10,000-foot runways, perhaps there's not much of a latent safety concern there. The issue is that as pilots become habituated to landing long, it becomes more difficult to land within the target touchdown zone when it's necessary, when you're landing on a short runway, when you're landing with a tailwind or in a wet or contaminated environment. And so with that trend of long landings, we see an increased risk of runway overrun in the data in our program. Now, this is the bad news part of my presentation. That trend has continued pretty much unabated. It's a fractional change, but there is a measurable still increase rate of long landing. The short way of describing that is that we're looking for landings that take place more than a third of the way down the runway using more than a third of the landing distance available. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's kind of the upshot of it, that this trend is increased very slightly since the report came out. Having said that, though, we have some good news that I'd like to share as well. If we could go to the next slide here, Lauren. And that is the flight control check event. So if you'll recall the 2014 Bedford incident, an aircraft attempted to take off with a gust lock set. We implemented a study that looks for flights that depart without there being a complete check of the flight controls. So rudder, aileron, elevators, and ground spoilers if applicable. And in the data, and the study goes back to 2012 here, you'll see that top line is the rate of non-compliance with a full flight control check. That was hovering around 15% before we started expressing this data for pilots. And this is again based on that 2014 incident. When we did start sharing this data with our flight departments in CFOQA, the rate began to plummet there, as you'll see in like the 2016 to 2017 time range, going from 15% to about the 5% range. The really good news is that, and this data is accurate as of 2 days ago when we did the last poll, is that this event rate is now below 3% of flights. It's actually less common now than unstable approaches overall. So this is a really, really good news trend that we're seeing in the participants in our program. The rate of this is into the noise of the other safety events that we monitor for. So that's really good. The caveat that I'll add to that is that when we have new participants coming into the program who've not participated in FOCA or FDM before, when we onboard their data for the first time, their rates are typically up higher about where we saw before this was released. So, which is to say that participation in a FOCA program, from our experience, is correlated with a very high rate of compliance with this. And when we have new participants coming in, we see that most of them are approximately where the industry was before. So we can't really extrapolate that with a high degree of accuracy to what's happening in the global community. But what I would say is that this speaks to the value of having an FDM or a FOCA program in your flight operation. It lets you understand what's happening. The pilots don't know to report, don't think to report, don't report in the SMS or ASAP process, and gives you a very high degree of information here. But this is a really good news story here, what's happening with this trend. One other thing I'd like to share is the unstable approach rate, and that's on the next slide here. Unstable approaches are at their lowest point ever in CFOCA right now. The official number last year is in the 3% range. It's down even since then. So unstable approaches are way down, and this is a 15% change year over year. This is really significant. They're the lowest they've ever been in the history of CFOCA right now. So we're really happy about this. This is a great improvement. So overall, very positive trend we're seeing here. The last slide shows the differential causes of these. This is a little bit of my chart, so don't hold us to this one. But the two biggest changes are the top event is the high rate of descent on final approach event. That's gone down considerably from 2018 to 2019. And the other big mover is being below the desired glide path on final approach. So if you think about those two, those are both in relationship to the aircraft with the glide slope, doing way better as a community overall in those two regards. So that's definitely something to be really happy about. So that's it for slides from me. Back over to you.
That was awesome. I always love to see I had to put my glasses on for the last chart, but I love to see that positive data. It just makes me super happy. Yeah, right? Okay, so that's one of the aspects of the data, but one of, there's many aspects, right? It's not just FOCA data. There's a whole big approach we can take to this. So narrative safety reports are always a key to data collection. So Jeff, can you explain what that entails and the benefits of that, please?
Yes, can you bring up the next slide, please? Yes, and before we go there, I want to expand a little bit on what Ben said there. So Ben showed you aggregate data from various FDM and FOCA analyses, and you can get the same thing for your own operation. So what do you do with that? So it's how we measure safety with this data. Find out what you're doing right and find out what you're doing wrong. So you can, with this kind of data, you can capture the latent conditions, errors, and trends, and you can propagate or you can proactively mitigate these risks. And you can wrap that right back into your training. You can also benchmark this. So you can look at this information and see how you're doing against an aggregate of other operators. And you can also share this, and Chad will be talking about that a little bit later. And we'll be talking about these a little bit later too, reducing liability costs and developing a just culture. So we'll touch on those a little bit later. So as Lauren said, there's more than just FDM FOCA. There's the other most common in data collection is narrative safety reports or textual safety reports. So let me talk about that for a few minutes. So the FDM FOCA data shows kind of what has happened, but a narrative safety report might be able to tell you why it happened. So if you use these together, you can gain more insight. So what is a narrative safety report? It's a voluntary, self-reporting, non-punitive program designed to proactively identify risks and hazards. And you can do it for in-flight operations, ground operations, maintenance operations. The most heavily used one is in-flight operations. So when you see a safety hazard or an event, you write it up and you submit it. And there's different kinds of programs. There's the less formal program, safety and hazard reporting. You might be doing that part of your SMS program. And then there's the formal FAA approved program, ASAP, Aviation Safety Action Program. So why would you participate in a narrative safety program? So specifically, those reports submitted by an employee, you can identify specific safety concerns and issues, operational deficiencies, non-compliance with regulations, deviations from SOPs, some kind of unusual events. So again, find out what you're doing right or wrong, capture those latent conditions, proactively mitigate, and provide feedback for training. So this kind of program fosters a cooperative, non-punitive environment as part of your SMS. So one of the questions that comes up all the time is protections. You hear about getting protections with the NASA ASRS program. It does give you limited protections. If you want to go further than that, you go with a formal ASAP program with the FAA. It gives you greater protections as long as you aren't doing anything egregious or dangerous. There's a way to work out those issues if you've made a mistake, and you can work through it, maybe get additional training, and you won't necessarily get pinged for that. So there's a whole process there. And again, a narrative safety reporting program is a key part of a successful SMS program. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Jeff. That was really informative. I love the passion for everybody that we all have. It's awesome. So next we're going to talk to Chad. Once operators are collecting this data, they begin to analyze it internally within their own organization to improve safety. But they can also share it in a protected manner to help improve their overall aviation system. Chad, can you tell us a little bit about ASIAS and its benefits, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, so ASIAS, like Tom said, is Aviation Safety Information Analysis and Sharing. And it started in 2007, and it's a collaborative government and industry initiative on data sharing and analysis to proactively discover safety concerns before they actually manifest themselves into accidents. So it's a very proactive program. We do this by being able to pull from an extensive warehouse of databases. The FOCA, the FDM, and the ASAP and safety reports are just one element, or the few elements that we're able to pull from to do analysis. I want to touch on, as far as contributors go within ASIAS, there's multiple communities within ASIAS, but specifically for this, since we're talking about business aviation, so I want to let you know that we now have about, or we do have 112 business aviation operators participating in the program. And this is pretty remarkable if you think about it. From when we started bringing GA into the size was probably around 2013, and we started with 2 operators. So we've grown, 110 operators since that time, and we continue to grow exponentially. That number might be old by, this was as of yesterday. It continues to grow every day. So that's really great. There's 2 paths to participation I want to touch on, and as far as, and we brought it up in part of this panel, you can provide or share your FOCA FDM data with the program, or you can share your safety reports like Jeff was talking about. And it's all voluntary, it's free. And just to give you an idea of the type of participation, so right now we're about like in thirds as far as business aviation. So we have the Part 91K, 135 communities, management companies participating. We also, the other third's the Fortune 500 companies participating, and we also have the other third being the smaller flight companies. As far as percentage-wise, so FDM, FOCA, out of those participants, about 23% provide FDM FOCA data, and about 33% provide their safety reports, and about 45% do both. So just to give you a sense of the type of data that's coming in. A key to this success is the governing principles that are within SIAS. I can't stress this enough. And whenever you sign on, you sign a cooperative agreement, and it goes through these core principles. And I'll just touch on a couple that that's really key. That it's a voluntary submission of data. So you retain your own rights to your data. The FAA never sees your data. Individual operators don't see your own data. Everything is aggregated so we can identify systemic safety trends. Everything is transparent, and the data is used solely for the advancement of safety. It will never be used for enforcement purposes. Those are some key guiding principles that we have within the program. That's why it's been so successful. We've had bankruptcies and mergers, but we've never lost anybody in the program because they were worried about what was being done within the program. And lastly, I just want to touch up on some ways that the results and the safety information and all the data is being used. So we've been able to generate, in particular for the commercial aviation safety team, the last 22 safety enhancements where it came solely from the ASIS information that we provided. They were informed by ASIS information. Also, the aggregated data from ASIS allows us in turn to provide that safety information out to the community. Ironically, if you subscribe to Fast Team Blasts, the one that came out this morning was talking about stabilized approaches. And in that, it talked about a study that we did within ASIS where we studied the focal, and we were able to quantify the risk of unstable approaches as it relates to the 3-to-1 glide slope ratio. So if you have a chance, go see that. That'll show you some of the safety information that we're providing out. We already mentioned community benchmarking. We have the ability to do that. We are able to, with all this information, we're able to look at design of stars, SIDS, and we're able to inform them so we have better design, better, safer approaches and departure procedures. We do that through improving ATC procedures, pilot operator procedures. Also, we just recently modified an arrival out west. Whenever we did some analysis, we were noticing that we were seeing an increase in TAWS events, so we were able to get ahead of the curve there and actually do some proactive changes to the stars going into that area. Lastly, I just want to mention about ASEMO, which is the Airport Safety Event Metrics Overview. This is probably one of the more popular items within the ASIS portal that a lot of business aviation operators utilize. You're able to go in there and see a multitude of risks, but what is really key is as a dispatch planning tool. You can put in specific airports, and then it will generate all the various risks that we're seeing within the system in regards to those airports. So whether you're looking to open up into a new market, or you just or it's a new airport that you're flying into, it's a really key piece of information that you and your company and your flight crews can better understand the risks flying into these areas. Just lastly, if you're looking to get into the program, the easiest path is just go to ASIS.aero, and that's ASIAS.aero. There's a contact us tab on there. You can go there and get in touch with us. Thank you.
Chad, thank you so much. The key takeaways, you heard it out of the FAA's mouth. It's not going to come back against you. They don't see your data, and it's free. Who doesn't love free? So that's a great thing. Thank you so much for all that information. Jeff, I have to ask, with your research in the virtual flight department, why aren't people, what are the roadblocks you've discovered? Why isn't everybody doing this?
That's the big question everybody asks. Can you bring up the last poll, please? Okay.
And before everybody starts to answer this, we got several comments back on the last poll. And just for your information, we had designed this as a multiple choice. You can select many choices on the last poll, and I believe that's how you want this one to work as well. Yes. So before everybody gets into that poll, let me just freeze this screen. And I'm going to go in and try to fix this to make sure that everybody that is participating gets the chance to do the same, to use this poll the way we had anticipated them using it. So if you just bear with me for a second, I believe I can fix this pretty quickly. It's limiting responses per person to 1. We don't really want to do that. We want them to to be able to select many different choices. So it's synchronizing the slide back for me. And in just a second, I'll be able to display it once again and then show the screen. And let's go ahead and do this poll now.
Yeah, so the question is, what are the barriers, challenges, or hurdles for you to participate in data collection and sharing? That question comes up all the time. Why aren't more operators doing it? It's key to your SMS. So let's see, I don't see anything. Here we go, show responses.
There you go.
So this is very interesting.
I need my glasses again.
So this is very interesting. So this is what the myths and facts are about these data collection and sharing. So while it's going there, I'll just go ahead and start to talk about these. So lack of a supportive safety culture, that is a significant one, because you have to have a supportive safety culture to be able to do data collection and sharing. It's fundamental because it's non-punitive kind of situation. So if you don't have a supportive safety culture, it's very difficult to do data collection and sharing, or if you're doing it, to use it effectively. Costs too much. Well, that is a function of your culture. The cost of data collection and sharing is very small. It's pennies compared to the hourly cost of operating a business jet or a business aircraft. So if it's not in the budget, think about that. It's not important then. It's kind of how it comes out. So that's really part of your culture. Takes too much of my time. Okay, that's good to see that was pretty low. People are concerned that it's going to take a lot of time to analyze the data and look at the reports and figure out what to do with it. But it's not too bad. Don't have the required aircraft equipage. So this is really related to FDM or FOQA. And this is a problem. Older aircraft are typically not equipped. Newer aircraft, if you buy a new aircraft today, it may not come standard with a QAR. You have to ask for that. They're not very expensive compared to the cost of the aircraft, but it's not standard equipment. You need to ask for it to put it on. If you don't have the equipage, there are some low-cost retrofit options now available that you can look into, and there's some options of just using kind of GPS data, and it's better than it's not as good as QAR data, but it's better than nothing. You can still derive some useful information out of that. Don't understand the incentives and benefits. Looks like most of you do get that. That's somewhat what this whole virtual flight department is going to help you understand. Small operators don't generate enough data. Well, most of these programs, these FOCA programs, allow you to benchmark yourself against other operators. And then a program like ASIAS allows you to see the aggregate data from all the operators participating, including the 121 operators. So you get a big benefit there. Privacy, security of the data, that's a big one, as you see there. And this is one which we've never had a problem. So as Chad said, nobody's left the program, the ASIAS program, because of a problem. There's never been a data breach that I'm aware of at any of the companies that process and hold this data for you. And this is one that comes up all the time, but it's not a problem. We don't see this as a problem. The data is de-identified, it's aggregated. Now the liability of the data, this is a really interesting one, because the operators think that the data, you're more liable if you have this data, that if you have an accident, they're going to see your data and they're going to go after you and sue you over this data. Well, I've been informed by aviation attorneys that if you do not participate in these programs, you are more liable, because it shows that you are not doing everything you can to improve your safety program. They see this doing these kind of data collection and sharing as an asset, as a reducing the liability. Worried about Big Brother? Well, you have Big Brother as the FAA, as Chad told you, and everybody will tell you, the FAA doesn't see your data, okay, in these programs. And the other Big Brother could be your bosses. Well, if you're worried about your boss seeing the data, you have a culture problem again. So again, this data should be available to your bosses, and it should be part of the whole experience. Don't know how to get started? Well, that's good to see that was low. Part of this whole activity with the virtual flight department is going to help everybody get started, because we do see in the community a lot of people don't know how to get started. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great feedback. So unfortunately, we've ran a little bit long, so we're going to have to wrap up. If you guys have any questions, you know how to get in touch with, I think, all of us. Go back to Flight Safety Foundation, LinkedIn, whatever works. But first, I wanted to thank Flight Safety Foundation for letting us do the panel and discussing some issues that we think are key, and we look forward to hearing back. But in the meantime, I'll hand it back over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Lauren. Hey, great panel. Jeff, Ben, Chad, great job. Really appreciate you guys stepping up and doing the panel this afternoon. And I'll just simply close with it's a real sense of pride for me and very rewarding to be affiliated with this type of talent on the MBAA Safety Committee, as well as the Flight Safety Foundation Business Advisory Council. So it was a real honor to participate this afternoon. And I really do sincerely hope that the attendees got a lot out of the 4 sessions that were provided during this virtual BAS. And with that, I'm going to send it back to Lisa, or Mark, I guess.
Thanks so much, Tom. And Lisa's back with me as well. I think we both want to say our thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. Excellent panel. Thank you for your comments and your time dedicated to that session. We appreciate it.
And just so the panel knows, one of the questions or one of the comments from the audience was that, you know, the safety department's on board, but the legal department isn't. And so maybe we'll have to get the legal department to see the video here and help out those companies that want to get going with data collection through FOQA and FDM. All right, well, we've had a great day. I'd like to invite Hassan Shahidi back with us, and we're going to close out our session in just a moment. But before we do that, we want to get on to a Flight Safety Foundation President Citation. And so, Hassan, I'm offering the floor to you.
Okay.
And let's talk about our award today.
Well, sure. Thank you, Mark. Great job, Lisa. You know, from time to time, the foundation wants to recognize the fantastic leadership from the community, those that have consistently over time have provided leadership and collaboration, especially with our business advisory committee and related roundtables, as well as other organizations throughout the years. And so we do want to recognize this type of leadership. That's why we had the Meritorious Award early on yesterday. And today we want to present a Flight Safety Foundation President's Citation and Award. And if we could have the drum rolls, please, at this time, and advance the slide. So Lisa, we're going to have to embarrass you a little bit. Apologies, this was a surprise. And, you know, you have been with us for a long time, and you and I had shared a number of conversations since I've come on board, and you have helped me certainly get a better appreciation of everything that's going on in this community. And I think your leadership has just been fantastic over the years. And so we wanted to just present you with a award. And I won't read the entire citation, but let me just read a few things and just embarrass you a little bit, if I may. It's in recognition of your outstanding service as co-chair of the Flight Safety Foundation Business Advisory Committee, as chair of the Flight Safety Foundation Business Advisory Committee, and numerous contributions over the years. Through your work at VisionSafe and Flight Start Solutions, you have made significant contributions to the reduction and mitigation of in-flight smoke and fire risks. And I know this has been a passion for you, Lisa. You and I've had a lot of discussion. I think the community recognizes that. So thank you very much for that. You have been really a driving force in the efforts to improve quality and timeliness of weather information available to flight crews, and widely regarded as an expert on aviation cyberspace security as well. I won't read the rest of it, but suffice it to say that I really personally appreciate your friendship and your counsel over the past year with me, and I'm sure the community really would agree that this is definitely a worthy award for you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shahidi. I'm overwhelmed and I'm humbled. I'm not sure I have any other words other than it is truly a privilege to be rewarded for passion and for my love of safety and for the ability to participate as a member and as an endorser of the Flight Safety Foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
And Lisa, would you like to offer some final comments as we close out today's session on the whole BAS event?
If my heartbeat would take a couple of beats down, I would. So we're at the close of our virtual BAS. It's bittersweet this time. It's hard to disconnect from the pontifical guidance that we hope we promised and delivered yesterday. I am extremely excited, and I know the foundation BAC shares this with me. We never went below 275, and we were straight north of that most of the time. Thank you to all of our speakers. We appreciate your dedication and your time, and specifically your dedication to safety. To our audience, we hope that you feel we hit the sweet spots. Once the golf courses are all open again, that would make much more sense. But on the subjects that were represented for you and your flight department, it is extremely important for us to have your feedback. Certainly as we go into developing 2020, I would once again like to extend gratitude to the Business Advisory Committee for their devotion and providing a strong agenda. They're always behind the scenes, and they're an incredible group of people. Again, see you in 2020. Dr. Shahidi, Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And we've got others to thank as well. We had a fantastic group of speakers. You know, we got started yesterday with the FAA and them talking about all the work that has really kind of ramped up for them. And the record in terms of Zoom meetings was quite interesting for Steve Dixon. That followed it up with what Dana was talking about in terms of investigations and all the activity that's still going on there. And they've easily turned into a remote operation. In the afternoon, we talked about things with the medical community. We followed up a little bit further than what we had done in one of our webinars, where we're talking a little bit more about what works in terms of prescriptions and what's some of the drugs you got to stay away from, just aren't going to be good for you. But we were also talking about sleep and fatigue and strategies to better defend against fatigue, as well as just for anybody, overall well-being. And then today, we got a little bit more back into, you know, what's ahead of us. How are we going to plan for getting back into flying? How are we going to, you know, tackle some of these key considerations that are showing up, and the fluidity of all the information that's sort of coming in as we're trying to apply SMS and do these risk management efforts. And then finally today, to look past the whole crisis and in this last session, and to hear more about, you know, what we need to do to manage this automation confusion, and you know, use the data that we might have right in front of us that's available to us, and there's avenues to make that analytics work for us and work fairly hard through some pretty robust programs like ASIAS. So once again, thanks to our speakers, thanks to such a tremendous job on that. We also want to thank our sponsors, Air Care International, Gulfstream, Quality Resources LLC, Advanced Aircrew Academy, and Polaris Aero. And as we've said several times, we're doing this in conjunction with and partnership with the NBAA.
And Mark, if
Hassan,
I may,
you want to add to that?
also recognize that there's an entire team behind the scenes that that the audience does not see that's making all of this stuff possible. You know, we went down this path of this virtual event and using this technology, and it was new to us, and I think it was new to a lot of people. And we wanted to see if we could make it work, and that we could make this event happen even in this modest version. I hope that you have found it useful, and again, thank you to our team and to staff who've made this possible.
Yeah. So one of the nice things about ending BAS 2020 is it won't take you very long to get home, right? All of us. And don't forget, things don't end here. There's more planned in the near future. We've got webinars coming up with regulators around the world, around the globe. We've got a webinar coming up on May 20th with the air navigation service providers. Once again, another global event, and it includes folks from all places on the globe. So we love to have you with us for those events. And then for this event, for BAS 2020, we're looking forward to what's going to happen for BAS 2021. And we can announce that BAS 2021 will indeed be in Savannah, Georgia,